Greetings. My name is Hing Wong, and I'm the chair of the APA Asian and Pacific Islander Interest Group. Our group was formed almost 3 years ago. Our goals are to bring together Asian and Pacific Islander planners, assist them in their career development, and discuss issues affecting the communities and neighborhoods that are predominantly Asian and/or Pacific Islanders. Today's webinar featured the Pacific Islander and Hawaiian communities. This is the second of a multi-part series with an additional webinar scheduled for June. To many outside of this community, all Asian and Pacific Islanders ethnicities are similar or alike, but we know that is not true. We are excited to have panelists today from the Pacific Islander and Hawaiian communities. The webinar is being recorded and will offer CM credits. The CM credits number is 9287067. We'll post that on the chat so you'll have that number handy. Next slide, please. We have a number of activities and events scheduled for the National Planning Conference in Minneapolis next month. We will host a free walking tour of the Little Mekong District in St. Paul. Some of us will take a road trip south of the Twin Cities to visit the Spam Museum in Austin, Minnesota. You can see it, I don't know, you can see it very well. As many of you know, Spam has been part of the Hawaiian, Polynesian, Pacific Islander, and Asian cuisines for almost a century. If you are not yet a member of our interest group, please consider joining by filling out a membership survey. Being a member is completely free and you do not need to be Asian nor Pacific Islander to join. Members will receive periodic emails on our activities and events, as well as our quarterly newsletter. The website and has all the past issues of our newsletter and recorded webinars. Both the website and the email address are on the slide, and this slide will repeat at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. Hanson Ham and Joyce Yees are today's moderator and will introduce today's program and panel. Joyce?
Next slide.
So welcome everyone to the second webinar in our series, Engagement and Empowerment of Asian Pacific Islander Communities. And we know, don't we, that Asian and Pacific Islander people have long been a part of the United States, but our voices are often underrepresented in general. So hence this webinar focusing really especially on Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiian community in Hawaii. And we have three panelists for you today. And Hanson, are you going to go ahead and introduce the first couple of people, Professor Siumalu Elora Raymond and Jeannie Winemori Skog, and then I'll introduce Lika.
Well, we'll introduce each speaker before they make their presentation.
I see. Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Yeah. But as you can see, the agenda is divided into two main parts. One will be presentations by our three esteemed speakers. And then I think the part two is really where the emphasis will be, where we have some questions prepared and we're encouraging all participants to please use your chat feature to indicate, feel free to enter your comments and enter any questions you may have, because during the second part of this webinar, we're going to try to address any questions you have and have a lively discussion or conversation with our three panelists. So we can go next slide, please. As was described in the webinar, this second webinar will focuses on Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian communities. And there's a number of topics that we've identified in discussing with the panelists that we will try to touch on that we think are very critical to all Asian Pacific and Pacific Islander communities and Native Hawaiian communities, but also is particular to these communities. So understanding the commonalities, the differences among these communities, the impact of historic colonialism, and how it's led to cultural fragmentation. And the important part is how these communities can be more fully engaged and meaningful in community empowerment, increase their political influence, and create a greater economic, financial sustainability. And the speakers will talk about how they've supported and advocated for Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian communities. Finally, because we do know that many of the participants on today's call are planners, we'll touch on how local officials and planners can more effectively engage and represent these communities. So next slide. So our first speaker, since my screen closed, I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, who is Dr. Seyu Malu Ilora Raymond, who's assistant professor at City of Regional Planning, College of Design, Georgia Institute of Technology. Dr. Raymond is an urban planner who is interested in the fiscalization of housing and property and land displacement and disposition through housing systems, housing and disasters, housing justice, race, segregation, and the transnational Pacific Islander community. Dr. Raymond has explored widening housing, wealth, inequality following the real estate of financial crisis of the 2000s, and the relationship between the financialization of rental housing and eviction-led displacement. She has studied the effect of the disclosure and affordability crisis in Pacific Islander communities in the Los Angeles area and the financialization of customary lands in Samoa. She has ongoing projects on housing, displacement, and disasters, including work on eviction and migration following disasters. Raymond has published widely and has papers on topics, on a wide variety of topics. And her articles have been featured in the New York Times, the New York Times Magazine, Washington Post, The Economist, Bloomberg Business Week, NPR's Morning Edition, ABC's Good Morning America, The Atlantic Journal, Constitution, Telemundo, Univision, the Samoa Observer, and Radio New Zealand. So if you can tell, she's very well published, and we're so pleased to have Dr. Raymond join us on this webinar. So Dr. Raymond, feel free to go on to the next talk. And we could probably close the PowerPoint for now, and then have it back on once the next speaker speaks. So Dr. Raymond.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you and welcome.
I'm so grateful to be here. I'm really excited for this panel, and I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with urban planners across the country. As an urban planning professor, I get to see people before they go off and change the world, and so it's really nice to connect with APA, particularly on this topic. I want to start off with a land acknowledgement. Georgia Tech is located on Muscogee and Cherokee lands. In 1821, the Muscogee and Cherokee were forced to relinquish this land, and I recognize the sustained oppression, land dispossession, and involuntary removals of Native peoples from the land where Georgia Tech is, and committed to rectifying those wrongs. I want to talk a little bit about just some projects that I've done that I think are relevant to planners. One of the projects that I've done was about the creation of mortgages against customary land in Samoa. And I think for an American audience, I think the Samoan planners are super interested in that project. And some Samoans are too, but I think for US-based planners, maybe I'll send you guys the paper, and we'll just talk about the work that we've done on gentrification in the Los Angeles area. This was a project that I started right before the pandemic. And we're going back to this topic again, working with Pacific Islander groups in Hawaii, in Oregon, and in Utah, and trying to understand what's happening with the housing affordability crisis and how that's affecting our Pacific Islander communities that have, been in generations in communities on the West Coast, but are really, really struggling with the affordability crisis now. So this work was done a couple years ago, but I think is very relevant to today. What we looked at, we reached out through EPIC in the Office of Samoan Affairs, and we met with 5 Tongan and Samoan churches in Los Angeles. And we also did a quantitative portion of the study where we identified different Pacific Islander enclaves in LA County. And then we looked at patterns of foreclosures, access to credit. So what kinds of pricing and how able were Pacific Islanders to buy homes? And we looked particularly, were Pacific Islanders able to buy homes in traditional enclaves like Carson, California, where, you know, there's lots of churches and cricket teams and restaurants and you know, festivals that are really important for keeping the culture together and for you know, lots of different types of support. And so what we found was that Pacific Islanders had an extremely high foreclosure rate in the lead up to the foreclosure crisis. It was a far higher foreclosure rate than other racial and ethnic groups. And this was substantiated also by the workshops that we did, where we talked with people about the very high foreclosure rate that people were experiencing. We found that after the foreclosure crisis, Pacific Islanders stopped applying for mortgages in traditional areas where Pacific Islanders had long lived. So there was a 62% decline in mortgage applications after the foreclosure crisis. And there was a 42% decline in mortgage originations after the foreclosure crisis, particularly in places like Long Beach and Carson, where Pacific Islanders had often lived. We found this denial rate was far higher than other racial and ethnic groups. And we also found that the pricing was really unfair. So Pacific Islanders, when we looked at the mortgage interest rate given to Pacific Islanders between 2004 and 2016, it was 5 points higher than prime. And that was a higher average rate than any other racial or ethnic group. Overall, we saw that home purchases fell by 22% from 2007 to 2016. So this was a time when far fewer people were buying homes, but it fell far faster for Pacific Islanders, again, by 42%. And then if you look specifically in places like Long Beach and Carson, this rate was just falling almost to zero by 63 or 69%. And I'll talk about why that's so important in a second. When we met with Pacific Islanders and talked about, you know, is it important to retain ties to a certain place, and what does it mean to be gentrified out of a historic community to either the Inland Empire or, you know, to Florida and to Georgia and places across the country? People talked about how important family and church were. Many people go to church 5-6 days a week. It's not something you want to be an hour away from. It's something that you want part of your daily life. They also really talked about how important it was to have those daily connections with family and with church, just to make life meaningful. That you know, they knew people who had moved out to Florida or other places where they're really distant, and they could see that people didn't feel like life was as meaningful outside of community. A lot of people talked about rental increases, and I think this is happening to everybody. But it is particularly hard when you're in a community that's struggling with wages and access to credit, lack of generational wealth, et cetera. So people talked about how annually their rent was raised, or even multiple times a year, rent was being raised. People talked about the way that family and community were at the same time being tested and challenged by gentrification, but also is a really important first stop for what to do when you were facing an eviction, or how to navigate a housing system that was just increasingly becoming impossible to navigate. People often, so it became apparent during these conversations, as home ownership is declining among Pacific Islander communities, the presence of a homeowner in the extended family is really important, because that's a place where you don't have to navigate a rental application fee, where you don't have to worry about overcrowding or things like that, the number of people per bedroom that a landlord might worry about. That's a place that you can stay, build up a deposit for your next rental apartment, and sort of navigate this housing crisis. People talked a lot about credit, and it was clear that a lot of people were didn't have great access to credit, and were being given really bad information about how to repair credit. So getting involved in predatory credit repair schemes that really overcharged people to improve their credit. And that maybe having access to good credit repair schemes would be really helpful for a lot of people. And also just access to good reputable banks. So you could see from our analysis of the mortgage crisis, a lot of Pacific Islanders were being offered subprime mortgages when maybe they might have qualified for something better had they had that connection with a reputable bank. Residents talked a lot about the administrative burden of trying to get rental housing, really feeling locked out from, I hear this again and again, of people saying, is there like a brochure somewhere that lists all the housing subsidies out there? And, you know, it was interesting talking with the Tongan community in particular. They felt the loss of, you know, there's the Office of Samoan Affairs. There had been an Office of Tongan Affairs that had gone away, and they could feel the lack of information about programs, whether it's mortgage refinance programs or, you know, assisted affordable housing or, you know, energy burden programs, just the lack of information flowing into the Tongan community. So I think for planners, thinking about ways to get that information together and to communicate it to different community organizations, and to think carefully, just because you're speaking with the Samoan community doesn't mean you're speaking with the Tongan or the Fijian community. Just really thinking about how to navigate all the different communities that exist in the city. Residents also talked about kind of the connection to the islands and the importance of mobility, the importance of being able to fly back and see the islands and maintain connections with the islands. And also kind of connected the experience of living in commodified housing markets and being kind of denied access to that basic human right of shelter with the experience back in the islands of having a right to the land. That's unquestioned, that's never going to go away. And that sort of being a foundation of a sense of having a right to shelter. That's all I'm going to talk about right now, but that's just some of the research that I've been doing specifically with Pacific Islanders. And it's similar to the work that I've done in Atlanta with the African American community, but it's also very different because we are a very different people. And I'm very excited to hear from our other panelists and to join the rest of you in conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raymond. I think what you've talked about regarding the mortgage issue and specific issues of housing related to the Pacific Islander communities is really helpful. And when we get into the facility discussion, we can certainly answer questions and get into details regarding the topics you've raised. Shannon, if I could get the PowerPoint back up. For those who are not aware, I want to do a call out to Shannon, Professor Lee, who is hosting the Zoom session, and she's running the PowerPoint. So thank you very much. Our next esteemed speaker, we're really proud to have with us from Hawaii, is Jeannie Unamori Skog, and she's the founder and partner of Skog Ramazan LLC. And she's the current chair, director of the Economic Development Alliance of Hawaii, EDAH. And Jeannie grew up on a pineapple farm in Paihai, Maui. Hope I butchered that. That's where you were born, Jeannie. She is a fourth generation Japanese who came to Hawaii in the late 80s as part of the wave of laborers for the plantation or the pine plantations. She has 10 other children of immigrant backgrounds and wove in the traditions and values of that blend of ethnicities in her own values. Her upbringing set a deep appreciation of values and benefits of a rural environment and the richness of ethnic diversity. Jeannie joined the Maui Economic Development Board in 1984, and in 1999 was elected as its first president and CEO, the first Maui-born resident to assume the position. Over her 33 span at MEDB, she built on its foundation of diversifying Maui's county's economic base with a focus on innovation. Lifting the voices of the community and decision-making about the future was integral to advancing MEDB's mission. That core value continues in Scott Rasmussen's LLC as it designs community and economic solutions for its clients. From 2011 to 2016, she served on the Commission on Presidential Scholars. She also serves on the Advisory Board of the Hawaii Budget and Policy Center and chairs the Economic Development Alliance of Jeannie. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank
Next
you,
slide,
Hanson.
please.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Hanson, for that introduction. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with everyone here based on specific grassroots experiences that I've had and undertaken in Hawaii. Next slide, just to put myself in a little context. Hanson shared quite a bit with you. In case you're not as familiar with Hawaii, this is the chain of islands that we make up Hawaii, and I am born and raised on Maui. Next slide. As Hanson noted, I do come from Japanese immigrants, and in fact, my grandmother was a picture bride. This is me in our pineapple farm. My father grew up with the plantation, but then branched out on his own to become an independent pineapple farmer. So I always laugh at this picture because I look so happy. I went on, as Hanson said, to be the lead of the Maui Economic Development Board, which was focused on and continues to be focused on innovation as a way to diversify our economy. As you might know, Hawaii, especially Maui, was dependent on agriculture and tourism, and much more so on tourism now. So we are constantly looking at ways to address the vagaries that happen because of that dependence in just one industry and the forces that it brings that are out of our control. I am now with Scott Rasmussen, and really pleased that it's become a vehicle for us to continue our work in community and economic development. Next slide. I just want to note that racial diversity is a given in Hawaii. Our blend of races is so common, it's expected, and my family is no exception, given the blend in our in the family that I'm a part of and have married into. That's just how I grew up. Our current county council leadership and our mayor, in fact, exemplifies the multiracial heritage that is a part of Maui and Hawaii and has for decades. Their ethnicities include Native Hawaiian, Japanese, Filipino, Portuguese, Korean, and a variety of Caucasian ancestries as well. So our challenge has been more about maintaining and perpetuating the mix, which is so much a part of the quality of life that we have on Maui. Next slide. I understand you are mostly, if not all, planners, so I wanted to share with you an engagement project led and was proud to be a part of while at MEDB that related directly to planning for our community. Focus Maui Nui was a visioning process for Maui County that became the values-based foundation for the update of our current general plan. Our goal was to reach 1,000 residents, including those not usually represented in these processes. It was a high bar, I will tell you, and really tested our creativity and imagination on how to reach across all demographics to be sure that they were a part of this, which of course included Asian and Pacific Islanders in our community. It was guided by a diverse set of perspectives on our 23-person advisory board. It was 9 months in planning and design, 3.5 months in execution, and 13 funders came forward to make this all possible. The results were that we reached 1,700 participants through 167 focus groups in those 3.5 months. I will tell you, having done about 60 of those sessions, it was a blur of a 3.5 months, but it really exhilarating to hear all of these voices that we might not have heard from otherwise. And you can see here in the chart, our reach on the Hawaii, Pacific Islander and Asian communities, which pretty much mirrors the census at that point. As importantly, we used the stat on whether someone had attended a public meeting in the year prior to our process. And good and bad news, 37% had not done any meeting, and 77% had done no more than 1 to 3. I mean, combined with the never. So it was a sobering picture of where we're at in terms of civic participation. Next slide. So community engagement and empowerment is in our firm services today. The specific designs of these most recent projects on solar energy development, doing a deeper dive on the on civic engagement for the Hawaii Community Foundation, and most recently developing the Hawaii Digital Equity Plan to ensure that everyone has access to broadband, affordable, and the know-how to use broadband. So all of these projects were in our most recent past, but the designs of these in outreach differed, but there are themes and takeaways that really cut across all of these and projects that we've done even in the past. So next slide. So what are the obstacles that we have found and have had to deal with? Hawaii has the highest cost of living in the United States. And it's so common to have 2, sometimes 3 jobs to make ends meet. I often say you do not live in Hawaii to make economic sense of your life. You live there because you absolutely want to be there, because you will have to do without, by and large. So given the high cost of living and the 2 or 3 jobs that often happens, on top of that, the family demands, it leaves really little time and energy for much else. Then there's a loss of trust in systems and leaders. We have had some recent scandals at the leadership level that have been really deterrents on participation and people feeling like their participation is going to matter. In fact, many feel that it won't matter. Intimidating settings and controversy create a fear of voicing an opinion in a public forum and can lead to avoiding participation altogether. Language and cultural barriers are ongoing as Hawaii welcomes a steady stream of immigrants from the Asia-Pacific region, which we welcome, but it does mean we need to be sensitive of how to help them assimilate and be full participants in our community. The lack of or cost of transportation and availability of childcare impacts participation as well, both of which, of course, relate to the high cost of living in our community. Then there's funding. Meaningful engagement, I will tell you, is labor intensive. It is an investment. It is a very worthwhile investment, but it is an investment. So if there's inadequate funding, it does not yield meaningful engagement. Next slide. So what we've learned in just a variety of engagement events and projects that we've taken on is that, contrary to what some may understand, people really do care about what's going on in their community. They want to be heard, and they really want to be helpful. It is really gratifying when we do go out and really design sessions that are interactive and so forth. People who do not normally participate are actually surprised that you really want to hear from them and are really, really actually grateful for the opportunity. Limited time means that they have to choose carefully what they do participate in. So in other words, time and energy are a factor, but they still do participate. They just have to choose really carefully and, watch their, what they're participating in. Trust must be earned. So respected leaders on an advisory group, if one engages an advisory group as part of the planning, is really key to success. And the advisory group must represent diversity in perspectives as well. People need to see that people who were in the advisory group represent them. They need to see themselves there. Then meeting residents where they are, and by that I mean geographically for sure, but linguistically, culturally, socially, do they have access to technology? Do they know how to use the technology? That's all part of meeting them where they are and how they live. Any event or meeting should also be designed to empower. So it's not just some talking head asking questions, but really looking at ways to design where you engender feedback and a healthy exchange and so forth. Multiple channels should be a part of the communication plan. Emails and social media are handy, but they are not enough. You still must publicize in print, in handouts, and even telephone calls still work very well. If organized well, if meetings and events are organized well, some will come out because they feel they will enjoy it. And that was a surprise to us. People see this as a way to have social interaction, meet their neighbors, get together with friends, and so forth. So, the content may be interesting, but that was also an attraction, which was a surprise. If the event can accommodate, the event or the cause can accommodate children, all the better, because it's seen as so important to nurture engagement from childhood on. And then, as I mentioned, the investment that's needed, you have to find the budget. You have to find the partners to help do this engagement in a meaningful way. And then finally, persevering. Passion is pretty persuasive and also builds credibility. If you're just in and a flash in the pan, you do lose credibility in terms of people wanting to respond to you. So that's really, really critical. So I hope some of those thoughts are helpful to you, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.
All right, so I have the pleasure of introducing our next panelist, Lika Smith. Lika was born in Samoa. She began traveling the world at a young age due to her father's Green Beret career, and this exposure to diverse cultures and communities shaped her belief in putting family and community first. Her commitment to community improvement is evident in her numerous leadership roles, and she has served as the president of Seattle National Organization for Women, a community organizer, and PTA president to several schools. She was also a board member of Utopia Seattle, NHPI Seattle, and NAPAF, the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, I believe. Other organizations like International Women's Day, Seattle, the Samoan Cultural Day, and the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. Pacific Islander Americans for Civic Involvement, aka APACE. In this role, she works to engage her Pacifica community in political issues, underlining her belief that everything is political, social. All right, sorry, trying to make sure. APACE, a nonprofit organization, envisions a just America that assures social, economic and political equity for the diverse Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. She currently serves as the Executive Director of the Pacific Islander Health Board of Washington. And in addition to her community work, Lika is a talented web and graphic designer who primarily works with local nonprofits. Despite her busy schedule and numerous responsibilities, she has successfully balanced her career and motherhood, raising 6 wonderful children. All her children have attended college, with 5 graduating and 2 currently in graduate school at Boston University. Her story is a powerful example of dedication, resilience, and community love. Take it away, Lika.
Thank you for that, Joyce, and thank you, Jeannie and Somalu, for those great presentations. Hi, everyone. I'm Lika Smith, the director of the PI Health Board, and I think my take was I didn't understand why I was at a planning meeting for planners, or a meeting for planners. So we were just going to explain to you who we are and maybe put in some points as to why we have to exist. So the Community Health Board, the Pacific Islander Health Board, aspires to be a catalyst for positive change, and we want to make sure that our community is supported, empowered, and that we are progressing forward. Next slide. This is a picture of the original, our founders, and so you can see on the very left, that's Tai Tufono. She was one of the speakers. She was a CAPA commissioner for Washington State at the time when she was joined our board. And so most of these women are powerful, fierce sisters that believe in health equity. We're talking about equity long before all these government counties decided that equity was important. And so in this picture, there's also a mix of island representation. And let's see, most of them are in the medical field or work for departments of health or academia. Next, please. Our vision, we envision a world where all Pacific Islanders are healthy, connected, and thriving. We value that health is spiritual, physical, and emotional. We value our traditional healing practices and hold advocacy, community, equity, social justice, and liberation as means to guide our board. In other words, we are a progressive island organization. So sometimes that's hard to deal with in communities because a lot of our communities are very conservative, but when they start learning about these programs and how it actually benefits their community, then we're trying to train them to be more progressive. But don't tell them I said that. I saw one person from Washington State here, so hey, but the evergreen state is Washington State. We are home to 29 federally recognized tribes. I am currently on the land of the Puyallup tribe. We are known for our beautiful mountain ranges, landscape. Depending on which data set, we either have the 3rd highest or the 5th highest NHPI population. We have been telling government officials and foundations that we actually suffer from a data genocide because no agency has been able to collect accurate data from our community. And we really worked hard for the census this last couple of years ago, and still people weren't participating because they were scared to get involved with government and having a record. The 2020 population for Washington State is, shoreline, 7,512,465. So the NHPI population has actually grown since the last census, and we are now at a whole 51,000. But again, a lot of people were not counted. That's just NHPI alone. NHPI in combination with another race, because I don't know if people are aware, but we love to mix with other communities of color mostly. The population is over 94,000. The largest percentage are from Native Hawaiians, and then Samoans and Chamorro. But the Marshallese have been coming in, so they will soon be surpassing the Chamorro population if they haven't already passed it. Next slide. So a little bit of history about the PI Health Board. We're relatively new. 2016, those group of fierce women got together and said, hey, we have a lot of health issues in our communities, and there's no equitable solution to our problems. We need to be advocates. We need to train advocates. So they got together and started volunteering their time. So they're working full-time jobs and doing the PI Health Board on the side. In 2018, they hired their first employee. me, and my job was to organize them and also start getting us out into the community. So we started providing basic health screens. 2019, we hired more staff, and I was so excited. And Mia is on the call right now. So she and Toka were focused on doing prenatal research because in Washington State, our prenatal care is terrible. Our rates are so low. So Native American women are at the bottom of the scale, and we're right above them for not accessing, prenatal care. And then our Black sisters are dying from postpartum. What is it, Mia? Postpartum deaths, and then we're right under them. So two levels, and we have high rates of NICU babies. So basically, we were doing a lot of research and community needs assessments when we started, and then 2020 came, and voila, COVID destroyed everyone. Our community was really hit hard. Me and my staff were doing all the supplying, toilet paper, because we would go stock up and deliver it to homes when people were on lockdown. We also were out on the street organizing vaccine clinics from every county. So if those of you from Washington, we'd go to Spokane County, Shoreline, what's up north? I am having brain farts everywhere. So like Mount Lake Terrace, and then down to Vancouver. So we were encompassing the entire state, and it was crazy. But we were also able to train some BIPOC doulas. So we trained, I think, 15 women altogether, and 9 of them were Pacific Islanders, and the rest were from BIPOC communities. Currently, we have community health workers on staff. We have DV advocates, and this means some of our staff is doing double duty. We like to try to create relationships with government agencies, but they also don't like to talk to me because I am telling them how they're not doing well. Sound Transit's here, and we have a lot of meetings with their team. We sit on numerous advisory and equity boards, so we're trying to do research with Seattle Children's and also get our people certified as language interpreters, because it's hard to do that in Washington State when nobody speaks the languages from these smaller islands. Go ahead. This is our beautiful team, and does not include our board members or volunteers. So this group of amazing staff members they represent a lot of different islands. Dr. Tara is from Hawaii. Johanna is from the Mariana Islands. Diela is Palauan. Alinda is Marshallese. Alana is also from Mariana Islands. Clara is Yapese. Amelia is Pohnpeian. Lai is Samoan. Gabby is Chamorro. And then Ala is also Samoan. So a lot of people don't know, even our own people. So people from Polynesia think that Polynesia means the whole of the Pacific. They didn't realize that we were actually segregated to these 3 labels: Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. We at the Pacific Islander Health Board do not use those terms because we consider them racist. We did not create those terms. We address each other by our island and not by these subtitles or labels. So these are some of the people that we work with in the community. And it's a vast, so many people have never heard of YAP. Even my mom, I had to explain to her where YAP was. I think that's it. Some of our common health issues are diabetes, heart disease, high rates of cancer, due in part to the nuclear bombing of the Marshall Islands and Tahiti, maternal health, lack of prenatal care, high preterm births, and postpartum mortality rates. There it is. Mental health issues exacerbated by the pandemic. During pandemic, we had, during lockdown, and people were not able to go home to their islands. So you had these kids separated from their community, and a lot of them were actually attempting suicide. So we had to hold a big event on Facebook Live just to get the word out. And we had kids from Hawaii joining. It was great. It was beautiful. Hawaii, Utah, California, and Washington were joining. We have high rates of poverty, food insecurity, and multi-housed. We have a lot of families where, you know, there's 5 families living together in a 2-bedroom apartment. Domestic violence is also an issue in our communities, and so we've had to train staff to deal with that. So we have DV advocates. The colonial introduced foods does not help our health issues. So like the Spam is not our food. Our food would be fish and coconut and taro leaves, you know. So my daughter's currently doing a project on food sovereignty. So I'm excited for her to get that published so we can get some more information. Next. I wanted to share this poem because a lot of our staff are immigrants to the United States. And when talking about our experiences growing up, they will talk about, like, they will talk about eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which I was shocked to find out that they had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And it was the peanut butter and jelly container that are mixed together. So they're eating that, they're eating Kool-Aid or drinking Kool-Aid, and it's just shocking, the food that we sent down to the islands when we had fresh foods. So mackerel and rice, mackerel and rice. Feed them taro, feed fresh fish. What kind of craziness is this? We feed imported food, you see, to increase your dependency. Peanut butter and jelly is good. We wouldn't serve bread food if we could, and a cup of Kool-Aid, if you please, to replace old-fashioned coconut trees. So a lot of people don't actually eat or drink coconut anymore. They will take Kool-Aid and mix spices in it and put it on other foods. It's inventive, to say the least. Next, please. Oh, okay. Cultural facts. So although we come from many, many islands, and it is really vast, the area that we encompass, we have a wide range of languages, traditions, and indigenous beliefs, but we hold the ocean as sacred, all of us, and that's what connected us and kept us together. And so I've had a lot of staff members run their DNA, and they find out, oh my gosh, I'm part Tahitian, oh my gosh, I'm part Samoan, because of our navigating ancestors. We have linguistic similarities, like Chuukese and Palauan dialects are similar, so sometimes they can actually figure out what the other is saying. And then like Hawaiian, Samoan, Tongan, etc. We have shared ceremonial and spiritual practices, and a lot of Christianity, but such as the ritual of planting the placenta to connect your child to the earth, and so that your child is safe and has a connection to their home. Traditional chanting that you've all seen in Moana or in Hawaiian commercials, and our oral traditions are really important to us. And the art of tattooing. And so the art of tattooing was actually lost because of colonization. And I had to go dig a bunch of sociology books through them to get images of different island tattoos. Next, please. And here they are. And when I showed this to my team, they were so shocked because, you know, we have Costa Rican people or staff members and volunteers. They weren't even aware that they actually had traditional tattooing. Our history keeps getting erased and whitened, I'm going to call it. But here's all the different tattoos. You can see all the different islands they represent. And this was just a sampling because I didn't have enough space. Next, please. Colonization, the effects of still affect us to this day. It has one of the things that it has caused is actually anti-Blackness, because we were trained that the white savior is good. We want to be more pale. Let us look like the white person. And because of blackbirding, and when we saw these, you know, European ships come in with the Solomon Islanders or the Papua New Guineans and using them in the slave trade that was in the South Pacific, we got the message that yes, darkness is bad. And so those are things that our current community members are trying to address and make and correct, because we have a lot of mixing in our islands now, or in the mainland. So Micronesian copra. The Spanish came, they sprouted us. The Germans came, they husked us. The Japanese came, they removed our shell. Now we are only soft meat. The Americans will surely eat us. And so that mentality is like deep inside of us, even if we try to still fit into mainstream society. I added this because it's there's a part of Washington history. So this statue on the right is of John Robert Monaghan. He was killed in Samoa during one of the many battles that the colonizers had with the locals. And if you read the accounts and the official report, it says he was such a hero and these savages attacked him and he only had one gun while we had none, right? So Monaghan is believed to be the first Washington resident to attend the United States Naval Academy and served in the Navy in the height of U.S. imperialism. Historians Lawrence Sebula said in 1899 the Navy attacked Samoa in an attempt to impose U.S. rule over the islands. The USS Philadelphia, which Philadelphia is one of my favorite cities, unfortunately, on which Monaghan served, shelled native villages while officers went ashore to burn survivors. Their actions targeted and killed civilians, including women and children. But here on his monument in downtown Spokane, by the campus, it clearly states that we are savages. So we have been trying to work on getting that removed. But on the left-hand side is my great-great-grandfather. He is the son of Manuel Silva or Augustine Silva, who was a sailor back in the day, and Mele Fiame, she is actually one of the chief's families. So he went and saved British and American soldiers when they were drowning out to sea. But there was no mention of those accounts in historical texts. But of course, us savages are mentioned here. So whoever's from Washington, help us get that removed. We're also part of the All of Us Research Program, and we would love if you guys would join the All of Us Research Program and help us share this information with Pacific Islanders specifically, because we don't have DNA in research. So the medicine that people take actually don't affect us in the same way. They did a report on heart medicine that they used in Hawaii that had no effect on Pacific Islanders, and they continue to prescribe this medication even though it has no effect. And I think that's it.
Next slide. But thank you, Lika. That was a wonderful, insightful presentation. I think it was very informative on many of us who are probably not as familiar with the different Pacific Islander communities, and there's obviously a diverse number. And your first comment about your focus on public health and equity, on how that relates to planning, I think that's very much integral to planners do. In California, for instance, environmental justice elements are not required in many communities. I'm sure the attention on public health and equity is strong throughout the planning profession these, or at least the recent years. But we're moving into part two. We have half an hour. We have a number of topics we can touch on, and obviously not enough time. These topics we can spend easily a couple of hours talking about them. We've identified some topics that we think are that the speakers have raised, and hopefully what they've talked about may have provoked your interest to hear more about. What we would like you to do, if you could help us prioritize, is indicate in the chat which topics of most interest to you, and we'll try to focus on those particular topics in the next 30 minutes as we can. But while you're thinking about these topics, we'll keep it up on the screen. I'm going to kick off with the first question for all of the panelists. And when we had talked with the panelists, we know there's a lot of misconceptions about the terminology and the various Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander populations. So to begin the discussion, and many of you already shared it, is talking a little bit about more, or perhaps when is it appropriate to address the communities collectively, perhaps for political autonomy, and when is it important to address the communities individually or distinctively to preserve their identity. So would the speakers like to start off with their thoughts on that?
Sure, and could we unshare the screen after people have had a chance to look? I like to be able to see the panel.
Yeah, if everyone hopefully kind of takes a mental note of the topics, and then we'll close the screen and just show all the panelists. Thank you. Okay. Who would like to begin?
Well, I'll jump in, though I think Lika is going to have a lot to say about this, just based on your experience. But I think that there's a difference between identification and solidarity. I think that I feel a lot of solidarity with other Pacific Islanders, and I feel a lot of solidarity with other Indigenous peoples that are dealing with colonization, specifically by the United States, but in general, and also a lot of solidarity with other people who deal with racism, racialization. But I identify as Samoan. I feel solidarity with all these other groups. And so it's really important to me to find terms that aren't putting down another community. So some of the terms that we've been given are racial or racist terms that come out of eugenics that Lika talked about. And I don't use those terms because I don't want to break that solidarity and put somebody else down. So I'm always looking for a term that's going to refer to all of us in a way that can bring us together, because we need that voting power. We need that combination to accomplish things. But I also I'm personally born in Samoa. My family is Samoa, and that's my personal identification. So I see a need for both, understanding each individual group, but also having a word that brings us all together, without putting anyone down or being exclusive. I don't mind Asian American Pacific Islander. It just, when I show up and there's no Pacific Islanders except for me, I feel a little sad. I feel a little erased. I feel represented without being represented. But I like the term, and I like the solidarity when it's truly there. So.
Thank
Are we
you.
just talking about terms? Because
That's what
I
we're
would agree with Somalu about that. I don't mind the AA as long as you put in the NHPI part, not just PI, because Native Hawaiians should be recognized for all the struggles they've gone through. So yes to the term, but also I don't want to be tokenized, and I hate being the only person in the room. So
Yeah. Jeannie, do you have anything to add from the Hawaii perspective? Wonderful tropical island there.
Sorry, Hanson, do you mind kind of repeating your question? I just want to make sure I'm
Sure.
hitting.
Yeah, it's a general question, not no specific topic. Is I know that when we talked about, and both Sayamalu and we kind of addressed it also, fact that the labels that we placed on ourselves, when we kind of used the labels, the larger labels, it kind of it's disrespectful because it kind of treats us as a monolithic population, versus the individual recognitions of the different communities. But at the same time, perhaps for political autonomy and other purposes, it is obviously, there's a lot of commonalities that collectively we can have more power than individually. So that was generally the question, and not really a question, just kind of thoughts on that.
Okay. I think the Hawaii context is different because, ironically, if you will, during plantation days, it was a difficult life. But I will tell you that a lot of children in my generation who grew up in that do remember one of the positive things that came out of it is that all of these races were thrown together. And so it was a combination of recognizing the individual ethnicity while seeing the value of the blend of the whole. So that is a legacy that has continued to today, and I think kind of offers some lesson and maybe a role model of what can happen if you're all in it together, kind of a thing. I do also believe that children having role models along those lines is critical to our future. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeannie. I'm gonna, Joyce, you wanna go with the second question? I'm seeing a lot of interest in housing and representation, which I assume also covers community engagement too.
Right, so there's a lot of topics that people are interested in, including engaging people in the communities that our speakers are talking about. Housing, absolutely, social and cultural factors. So the second question here that we have, and inviting our panelists to talk about, is the struggle that Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders have faced, are facing for political autonomy. So the first part are, all right, trying to think how to reword this question a little bit. Necessary prerequisites and any successful examples, I would say, for effectively engaging and including effective engagement, inclusion, and empowerment of these communities. So inviting our speakers to talk about that.
I think here in the mainland is definitely reaching out to, there's a lot of nonprofits now that are Pacific Islander focused. And so if you reach out to one, they should be able to help you and develop a relationship, not just a fake relationship, because we've also had that where officials come in and they want our time and our energy and our input. We are not reimbursed for all that time and energy and input, and then they move on to the next person and I never hear from them again. This happened just recently during COVID. I had to fight with the biggest county here, King County, to hire my team to translate materials. They gave us $32,000 for 7 staff members to translate materials for a year for 7. That's the disrespect that we have from government officials sometimes. And that was the value, because they gave other communities the same amount for one person. But because we had all these islands that we had to think about that truly needed the translated materials, and we didn't want to have our team constantly volunteering, which is what they were doing, pay for their time, reimburse community, and actually create a true lasting relationship. We also have a relationship with a dental foundation here in Florida, and they come to our office. They engage us consistently throughout the year. There's a true relationship that we're building. So build relationships, reach out to one of the nonprofits, or somebody in your workplace, I'm sure, has a connection as well.
Thank you, Lika.
I'll pipe in and say that I don't know as much about this as Lika would, just being an academic and living where I live. But I think that there are other countries that are doing a better job of relating specifically to Indigenous Pacific Islanders, that do a better job of respecting sovereignty or dealing with Indigenous Pacific Islanders as sovereigns in a way, and also in understanding how to represent and uplift cultural values that save lives, that provide access to shelter. I mean, when I think about COVID in particular, we had such horrible death rates among Pacific Islanders in America. But if you look at the Free Pacific, the Pacific that's self-governing, Samoa turned his back on its tourism industry and said, let's save lives. And my cousins in Samoa went back and started planting taro. And those values, prioritizing health and safety over the economy, save lives. The relationships with land in some of our Pacific Islanders are not commodified, meaning it's not about making a profit off the land as much as possible, but it's about thinking about how land can sustain community, family, all the other things we might want to do, and tourism. but there's a different set of priorities and values. And so I think like understanding those values and incorporating them into policy is something that's being done across the Pacific. It's being done in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's being done to some extent. Yeah, I'm not going to mention Australia right now, but but you know, we could look across the Pacific and think about ways to do that better. And I think also when you talk about the mental health issues, a lot of what I see my family who are educators in Aotearoa, New Zealand, doing they're really uplifting Maori culture and Pasifika culture, which is the term they use there, to really make people feel heard and seen and not erased. And that I think really helps with the mental health challenges too. So those are some of the strategies that I see being used around the globe. And I really feel like, particularly on the East Coast, I wish we could do a lot more of that here in the US.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you know, to Lika's point too, I mean, it just demonstrates you have to invest in bridging the divide. You have to do it. Because some of these populations are most challenged from an economic point of view, but we all want them to be, you know, welcomed and a part of the community. And that means reaching out, as I said, where they are. And to do that, you have to invest in it. We've just been in the middle, I referred to it, developing the state of Hawaii's digital equity plan, which has been funded by the federal government, and specifically addresses populations that were most unserved and underserved as it came to light during COVID. And certainly these populations, Pacific Islanders and so forth, are really affected by it. So if we really are looking at equity, we have to invest in the reach out. There's just no way around it. And you know, it's funny when you talk about translating documents, because that's so basic. Hawaii has 125 languages. So obviously of different percentages, but still it's a daunting challenge. But the health department actually has a language division, because to do their job, they've got to be able to have interpreters and so forth. But that means an investment. So it has to be a priority.
Yeah, totally agree. I was going to bring up an example that's very relevant to what the panel's been talking about in the community that I'm currently involved in. They're just kicking off the workshop process, community engagement process, to prepare a mandatory environmental justice element. And in California, certain communities are required to provide that. And they've talking about investment, they came in with a proposal saying we need to increase the amount of money for community investment by 20 to 30,000, because in our preliminary analysis, we realized what we planned for was not sufficient. So one of the target groups they've identified is a more concerted specific outreach to Pacific Islander community. So that's one of the targeted workshops. And part of the reason is gets to what Laika's talking about is they've identified a lot of public health specific issues in Pacific Islander communities that needs to be addressed in an environmental justice element. So so this webinar really hits home and underscores to me the importance of really good concerted and targeted and innovative creative forms of community engagement. Okay.
And I want to see if
yeah.
Dr. Raymond, if you wanted to answer that question as well from the perspective of your research that you've been doing with Pacific Islander residents on housing.
Sure. Could you restate the question? Just, I want to make sure.
Okay, so what are necessary prerequisites and successful models for effective engagement, inclusion, and empowerment of Pacific Islanders?
I think reaching out through trusted organizations is a great way to do it. And I think understanding that different communities are organized differently. Like it's probably easy to reach out to the Samoan community through the churches, but you may not find it that the church is the right organization for other ethnicities. And so really understanding how communities come together and how they're organized and reaching out to them through those trusted organizations. I think what Lika said about having sustained engagement and paying people for their time, you know, not asking, we have a lot of tenant organizations, they are just barely able to do what they're trying to do, to then ask them to donate 10 hours of work, you know, workshops and sitting, you know, all those things take time and cost money in a way. So making sure to pay people, or think about the material concessions that you're asking from them. I think understanding like housing is a very personal thing, right? Like your house is a very personal thing, and the way that we live, who lives in our house is different from culture to culture. And so understanding that the housing needs may be different, or even like what a household is or who you're planning for may be very different. You know, maybe if you're dealing with one community, you can think about individuals or the number of people, but maybe when you're dealing with a Pacific Islander community, you're really thinking about the extended family and home ownership, not as housing households, but a homeowner in one extended family is very important. So those are some of the things I think about. And then the other thing I always promote is it's becoming more common across the US to think about social housing again and to stop seeing the market as being a solution. And I think that we really need to think about that, particularly in these high cost cities, about models of affordable housing that don't rely on the market for land, but have some form of public or nonprofit land ownership, because the costs are just getting too high. It's a very short summary of a very long answer.
If I might add, Hanson,
Yeah,
I encourage everyone to watch what's going to happen on Maui with housing after the wildfire. It is a tremendous challenge. There is no silver bullet, and many options are being considered. There's obviously economic risk because some people have already left Maui, whether it's for Oahu or the mainland, they've left. And obviously it has an impact on the economy, but it also has an impact on us losing our cultural legacy and values, because people just can't afford to stay here and have no place and no future in terms of homes. We lost 7,000 people lost their homes, and many of them are still in hotel rooms and just feel very frustrated, depressed, you know, and so forth. So it is a tremendous hurdle. But at the same time, I'm sure there are going to be many lessons learned on options and, you know, creative solutions and so forth. But yeah, anyway, just stay tuned.
yeah, that what you're talking about, Jeannie, can be just a whole webinar unto itself, you know. Wildfire recovery efforts, and we do know that when the wildfires happen, the most vulnerable populations are hit the hardest. They're the ones that are the longest recovery time. So greater attention certainly needed for that. And I know what we're all kind of looking and looking at the Maui situation, and I wish the best for the population's recovery efforts there. Yeah, kind of, another area that's kind of tied to what you're talking about, Jeannie, and I think I see that there's participants interested in this area, and I'm going to group the interest into maybe have one kind of general topic and allow the panelists to talk about whichever area they would like to speak on. But there's a lot of interest in the type of support, whether social programs or cultural sensitivity or support or supporting economic sustainability in these communities. And for all three panelists, or there's some recommendations, suggestions on how organizations, how government, how planners can better support the social, cultural, and economic needs of these communities.
I'll start. I don't know if it's solely in the hands of planners, but one thing that's working in Maui County, as a result of the Focus Maui Nui effort, about 4 years after it was completed, a group of Maui leaders formed the Ka'ipukukui Young Leaders Program. And it was founded on the values that came out of Focus Maui Nui. It's now in its 17th year and has, quote unquote, graduated over 200 young leaders who must be from Maui, Molokai, or Lanai in order to be eligible. The beauty of it is extremely diverse, and they look for diversity in every cohort. So if there's some way to encourage Asia Pacific Islanders in other communities to be a part of something like that, it is very foundational to the future and to the blending, if you will, and respect for others who are, you know, different from you. And it's created tremendous bonds because the program goes for a whole year. And it's been really, really effective. So that's one thing I could suggest.
Rika or say Mailu, any thoughts on that question?
Are we talking about kind of post-disaster recovery processes or?
Oh, just general social, cultural, or economic support programs that based on your experience would be most helpful for these communities?
Let me see if I can make a connection back.
Mhm.
Dr. Raymond, earlier you shared with us that credit recovery is a big issue amongst the Pacific Islander residents. So anything you can suggest to us, our audience, about, you know, helping residents deal with,
Yeah.
because that's
I
very
mean,
much an economic issue, or anything else you found from your
Yeah.
research.
And I never like to blame structural issues on individuals. At the same time, I want to help individuals thrive in a system that where the deck is stacked, you know? So I'm going to balance that comment with the overall observation that housing is too expensive relative to wages, particularly in places where Pacific Islanders live. And there's nothing that you can do about that. You can't budget out of that. You can't get your credit score so high that it's going to solve that problem. So I don't want to place all the blame for those structural issues on Pacific Islanders, but I will say that even in that context, we don't have great access to credit. We don't have great access to credit repair. We don't have great financial education. All of those things would help. They will not solve the problem. And what's needed is really much broader social safety net for housing. While we're talking about kind of smaller scale individual level solutions, I did like there's this group, I think it's called the Mission Asset Fund, and they do credit circles. And I just thought this would be a nice fit for some of our Pacific Islander communities are very tightly connected with one another. And so a credit circle is one in which people bond together and lend each other money and repair each other's credit by making payments to the general fund. And so in essence, you skip the middleman and you build community and repair credit at the same time through this sort of mutual aid. And I thought there's a nice model that really kind of might fit with some communities and cultures. But then I want to kind of say, like, if you're struggling to pay rent, it is not your fault. Everyone's struggling to pay rent. There's not a state in the union where median income is helping you find affordable housing. And so we need to deal with those structural problems before we can kind of put it on the individual to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Yes. Thank you.
Nika, how about you? Any thoughts on the question?
The question is economics, right? So sorry, I have my foster baby here with me.
economic or cultural or social, or just in general, and your organization does a lot of supports, I feel like, that go beyond
Yeah.
healthcare issues, right? The cultural supports.
Yes,
for
I'm also
instance.
paying for people's stuff out of my pocket continually. That's all year long. Um, but I echo everything Dr. Somalu said. That's accurate, and it is a systems problem. So credit or no credit, that's not going to help you. We do have a couple of programs that have been started in Washington State. It's a guaranteed income program, and like there's $500 if you reach 150% beneath the poverty levels or whatever. So there's that one. We worked on with another organization on the mom's income, and I like that idea better because there's a lot of stay-at-home moms that could use that support, especially when they're in a DV situation. So letting them have funds, access to funds that's just theirs. And like Joyce, I think because I've known you a long time, but we're talking about having a mom's union, a women's union back in the day, and having income for moms that are staying at home, doing all the work. Okay.
Yep.
They have that in
Until-
Australia, right? They have, there's actually like a universal basic income for caregivers, who are often moms, but not always.
That's great. I mean, looking at the poll, it looks like and we've touched on this, so there's the number one interest that I saw in the poll was discussing ways to increase government representation and presence in decision making, probably in government. And since we have, I would guess, primarily planners on the call, maybe specifically in the planning profession. I know all three of you are not, say Moa, you're a planner, so I should, don't want to discount that. But any kind of discussions, how can these communities, how can we better involve them? We talked about community engagement, but how can we further actually actively involve them in decision making? Jeannie gave a wonderful example of what Maui's doing, which is really wonderful, of recruiting community members to be directly participate in government. But any kind of further thoughts or suggestions?
May I reorient this question a little bit? Because when we created it, I actually
Mm-hmm.
had our planner audience in mind.
Mm-hmm.
How do we better increase the representation of our planning staff, not just Pacific Islanders as planners, but for our other underrepresented groups of planners of color, especially
Yeah.
Black and Latino and Indigenous planners? How do we do that, and how do we retain staff, right? It's not just adding numerically, it's also changing the culture of our organization so that we actually retain staff over a long period of time. So just want to kind of, if I may, Hanson, turn it to our audience who are planners.
Yeah. If there's any thoughts from audience members, we only have a couple of minutes left. You could even put your comments in chat, but if someone's brave enough to raise their hand and share some thoughts, we'll open up the mute button or remove the mute button for you. But that I appreciate that rephrasing of that question. I see Louise Eagle has raised her hand. Shannon, can you recognize Louise?
Yeah, I think can you hear me all right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Louise.
Hi, Handsome. And I just wanted to alert the other people, Handsome Home is now a fellow within the APA. So,
Well, thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
But I hope you had some other comments besides acknowledging that.
Yeah, I think actually a couple things. First of all, at the college and graduate levels, the responsiveness to the educators, to the interests of a much broader input from people of different ethnic and cultural heritage is essential. It's being built, but it's not I would say, broadly being affected throughout most classes, except those that focus on that. But even before that, at the high school level, the encouragement of students to move ahead or to continue on with higher education. I know this is but then this then ties into things like the financial aid availability and practicality of, say, a single parent going through school and such. So it's quite complicated, but I do feel that I've noticed through the years, I've been in the planning industry for quite a few years, that it hasn't changed a whole lot, except in a few states or a few regions. So I'm hoping that will change with time.
Yeah. Thank you, Louise. Thank for being brave and raising your hand. And thank you for the acknowledgement. And we only have 2 minutes left, so I wanted to turn it over to Hing for closing comments. But before I do that, I want to thank you, everyone, thank you very much for taking time out in your afternoon or evening, wherever you are, to attend this webinar. So Hing.
Thank you, Hanson, and thank you, Joyce, but especially thank you to our speaker, Dr. Raymond, Lika, and Jeannie for presenting today. And thank you all for joining. Our next series of events will be in person in Minneapolis at the National Planning Conference. So if you haven't joined our interest group yet, please join it. You'll get information via email, and we'll be happy to see you in person at a number of events that we have in Minneapolis in mid-April. So thank you again, everyone, for joining today. Have a good day or good evening wherever you are, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Okay, thank you. Have a good evening.